June is National Safety Month, but in my opinion, every single day needs to be Gun Safety Day. Hi folks, my name is Paul Carlson and I'm the owner of Safety Solutions Academy. Today I'm here at the range with you and I'm going to bring you gun safety tip number 4 in our 30 tip video series for the month of June. And that tip is to keep your gun pointed in a relatively safe direction whenever possible. Folks, we know that gun safety rules are an important part of leading a safe life if you have firearms as part of your everyday existence. There's no doubt about it. If you ignore the rules, if you don't know the rules, or if you're just flat out ignorant of what's going on with firearms, you can hurt yourself or somebody else. And of course, we don't want that to happen. June is National Safety Month, but I want to make every day Gun Safety Day. And that means helping you to understand gun safety rules, making sure that you know that it's important to follow them, and sharing this information with everyone that we possibly can so that we can spread the word about gun safety. So let's talk specifically about keeping your gun pointed in a relatively safe direction. You saw that just a moment ago. I was shooting downrange. I'm lucky enough here at the range that I train at and that I invite students to from around the country that I've got literally a 90-foot cliff backstop back there. It's very simple for me here on the range to determine what a safe direction is. When you saw me turn around, I also demonstrated a safe direction, not at the backstop, but down at the ground. When my hand came down to clear my shirt to be able to reholster my handgun, notice the handgun came out in a way to make sure that I wasn't pointing the handgun at my hand, but was pointing it down at the ground. Perfect examples of pointing your firearm in a relatively safe direction whenever possible. Let's talk about why it is that we need to point our gun in a relatively safe direction. The fact of the matter is that if the gun were to fire and the gun is pointed in a relatively safe direction, you might be embarrassed. Someone might be angry. You might be done shooting for the day or maybe forever with a certain group of folks. But the fact is, if it's pointed in a relatively safe direction, you're probably going to be able to live with the consequences. You see, if it's pointed in a direction that isn't relatively safe, the direction of another person or where people could be, then there can be consequences that someone might not be able to live with. Maybe the person that the round that you fired impacts. Now you see, this rule works very closely with the first rule we talked about, keep your finger someplace other than the trigger until you're ready to shoot. If by chance your gun is pointed in a direction that isn't relatively safe, but your finger isn't on the trigger, everything's probably going to be okay and you have an opportunity to fix the situation before things get really bad. If, on the other hand, your finger's on the trigger, but you're following the tip we're talking about today, keeping the firearm pointed in a relatively safe direction, and the gun happens to discharge, probably because of that finger, the round is going to go someplace where the consequences are survivable. Here on the range, putting a round into the ground, putting a round into the backstop when you weren't quite ready to shoot, probably not the end of the world. But if you break this rule, and your firearm is pointed at someone that you love, and the gun inadvertently fires, whether you fired it or something else happened that made the gun fire, which is pretty unlikely, those consequences aren't something we want to deal with. So keep your firearm pointed in a relatively safe direction whenever possible. Now let's talk about that from a practical standpoint. Here on the range, again, it's simple. Down at the ground or at the backstop, no problem, almost regardless of what it is that happens with the firearm. But what about in the real world? What if you live in a second-story apartment in a 3-story apartment building? Down might not be the best direction because there are folks that are living in that living space down. Up, well, that doesn't work either because there may be someone home upstairs. To the sides, you may have folks that live in apartments on either side. The other 2 sides of the apartment, maybe there's a recreation area where there are people at or a parking lot. You see, it's almost like there isn't a good place Well, you have the ability to create that place. Maybe it's a hardwood bookcase stacked with lots of books to help increase the knowledge in your brain and at the same time stop a bullet should you make an error with your firearm. It's those kinds of choices that you can make that can help you to lead that safer life. So think about keeping your firearm pointed in a safe direction in the real world, in everyday use of firearms, as a common sense problem that you need to solve wherever it is that you need to handle your firearm. There's always a degree of balance that we have to strike between the benefits and the risks. Of course, the less you handle your firearm, the less you have to worry about it, and that's really a good option when you're out in public. But when you do handle your firearm, use your brain and figure out the direction that is the safest that you can, so you can point your firearm in a relatively safe direction whenever that's possible. Folks, following firearm safety rules is a critical part of good gun handling skills, of safe gun handling skills, and it's a critical part of gun safety. Make sure that you practice keeping your firearm pointed in a relatively safe direction whenever possible. June is National Safety Month, but folks, remember, every day can be Gun Safety Day with your help.